Hello, good afternoon to this special News 9 interactive session. I am Arun K. Sundaram, your host, and today we have a very important topic for discussion. We all know how businessmen crib about the fact that they are forced to obey a plethora of rules and regulations. Interestingly enough, there is a new report which has come out, courtesy ORF Online, and two exceedingly very important policy analysts. I have with me Mr. Gautam Chikarmane and Mr. Rishi Agarwal, both of whom who have spent quite a bit of time and effort in developing this report, which is titled The Issues Relating to Doing Business. In fact, the report is titled, as 25,134 criminal clauses in India's business laws. And it says jailed for doing business. It's a very important report because it is to be seen juxtaposed to the fact that the government of India and the state governments are pushing the nation towards ease of doing business. So how far have we traversed on this particular path? That will be the subject matter of discussion this afternoon. And I do hope that we will get pearls of wisdom from these two gentlemen, Mr. Gautam Chikarmane and Mr. Rishi Agarwal. I'll begin this interactive session by posing my first question to Mr. Gautam Chikarmane. Gautamji, your study indicates that the problem of case of doing business comes from the state governments. In your report, you've alluded to that. Have you been able to record or rank which of the states are notorious in terms of having this issue of having a plethora of rules and regulations or legislations which are preventing or impeding businesses?
Yes, thank you for having us here, Mr. Sundaram, and it's a pleasure to be here. Your question is very sharp, and yes, our research does give you that answer. The top 5 states that carry the maximum number of criminal clauses are Gujarat, Punjab, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and the 5th I am at this moment forgetting.
It's Karnataka.
5 states, pardon, sorry?
It is the 5th is Karnataka.
Karnataka. These 5 states have more than 1,000 imprisonment clauses each, and they have more imprisonment clauses than the bottom 21 states combined. In that context, I would also like to say that many of these laws are not necessarily enacted by states alone. There are the master law, the base law is often enacted by the union government. And that is the complexity in framing the wide disparities of state. Let me give you another example. Under the rules under the Factories Act 1948, they differ, the expressions differ across states. Under Karnataka, for instance, there are 706 imprisonment clauses. Under Goa, 539. West Bengal, 519. On the other side, 2 states have less than half of what Karnataka does. Delhi has 319 imprisonment clauses under the Factories Act and related rules, while Madhya Pradesh has 339. To that extent, although the start in the factories, that the reforms, the compliance reforms in the Factories Act need to be initiated by the union government or at the union level or in the parliament, the expressions have to be done at the state level. So when Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently said that he urges the state governments to hunt for and end such compliances, he's absolutely right. But it starts with the union government. The union government has to initiate change. The state governments can't follow.
Okay, that's a very interesting point that you've highlighted, Gautam. Now, Mr. Rishi, as Gautam alluded to, there's an interesting point that he's talked about. You know, he's talked about states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Delhi, or rather Tamil Nadu. Now, if you were to look at the list of FDI recipients, the states that we talked of, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, they happen to receive a significant amount of investment inflows. In fact, probably, I think about 60 to 80% of the investment inflows come into these 4 or 5 states. So what explains this kind of contradiction? I mean, is it largely one probable factor could be the fact that, yes, it's come into sunrise sectors like information technology, where it's thrown off all these kind of vestiges of the past and, strict rules and regulations. They have much more greater amount of leniency. But the other question is, even in hardcore industrial area investments, it is these states which are showing the direction as far as the rest of the country is concerned. So what explains this kind of a contradiction at play, Mr. Rishi?
So Arun, I think what we're missing here is the fact that ease of doing business and criminal items is not the only reason why states progress or don't progress. It's a key contributor. It's an important contributor. But there are other things, including access to large tracts of developed land, access to logistics supply chain, good highways, other policies, access to talent, an ecosystem of talented pool of people. There are other factors which govern effectiveness of the state, development of the state, while ease of doing business policies and compliance contribute as a contributing factor to that. Now, imagine what these states would do if ease of doing business became easier. The other factor here, point 2, I would like to make, and this is not I saying this, I have come across this multiple times, that India is where it is not because of the government, but in spite of the government. So, private entrepreneurs, private entrepreneurship has done exceptionally well in some of these states. And I congratulate the entrepreneurs to have the energy, the enthusiasm to continue to invest and continue to work for job creation, GDP development, in spite of all of these things. And I think it's important to scrutinize them and get rid of them and imagine what these states each could do.
Okay.
But somebody, while we were on social media talking about a report, somebody mentioned that all the entrepreneurs need to be given a Bharat Ratna for having endured these excesses. I want to make a small point here,
yes,
Mr. Sundaram. We mentioned those 5 states, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, but the state which has the second highest number of imprisonment clauses is Punjab. And in terms of manufacturing, Punjab is nowhere in the scene. In terms of FDI, it stands nowhere. Despite that, Punjab has the highest, second highest number of imprisonment clauses in its armory, in its compliance armory. That's what I would call it. So I think reforms or compliances, and there is no direct causality, as Rishi was saying a little earlier. There are thousands of things that go into it. Although it is here in the case of Punjab, it is very tempting to say that because of it is so many criminal clauses, it's not there. I think Punjab is a very, we need to study Punjab carefully.
Okay. There's a bit of a deviation from what I had thought of. I was looking at an initiative like the PLI scheme, where you're talking in terms of bringing in billions of dollars to, facilitate manufacture in India, provide jobs to several people, not just blue-collar jobs, even white-collar jobs. That is one important development which has taken place. The second important development is the kind of money that is being spent as far as infrastructure development is concerned. And as Mr. Rishi was alluding to it, I just want to throw this question to you, Mr. Gautam. Assuming these 2 factors, the PLI scheme on the one hand, and the massive amount of infrastructure investment, particularly in the industrial corridors, we are talking of the corridors from Chennai going up to Mumbai via Bangalore, and then you have the Delhi, Mumbai corridor, express corridor. So these 2 factors in play, do you think people who make investments in India or who are willing to pour in the billions of dollars will be looking at these two important factors or facilitators much more than the fact that, you have so many impediments by way of rules and regulations at work.
As Rishi mentioned earlier, rules and regulation are not the only deciding factor. There are opportunities, there is markets, there is consumers, there is a growing nation.
Mm-hmm.
Despite these rules, we are a $3 trillion economy, going on 4 shortly to become the world's 4th largest. And before the decade is over, we would have crossed Japan and become the world's 3rd largest economy, despite all these, with all these constraints.
Yes.
What we are suggesting is not, what we are suggesting is how to accelerate this. And if you recall, the statement on industrial policy, 1991, opened up the economy.
Correct.
The Indian economy began to grow. It became more market oriented. It attracted capital. And the license Raj was ended or almost ended. But the inspector Raj continues.
Mm-hmm.
At any moment, to give you an example, Mr. Sundaram, at any moment, 20 inspectors can descend on an MSME and ask for books, papers, any kinds of things, and harass the life out of any businessman. It is these harassments that we are talking about. You're right. When it comes to FDI, I have spoken to the head of a very large pharmaceutical company from America that's functioning in India. And I said that yours is a pharmaceutical company. It requires excellent facilities, cleanliness. It requires dust-free environment. You wear masks and do all those, make your medicines, because these are very technical. You can't have filth out there. So where do you keep your spittoon? Under the Factories Act, you are supposed to have a spittoon.
I didn't know this.
Feet away from
the
plant, from the machinery. And if it is not there, you can be jailed for about 6 months. Rishi, correct me if I'm wrong. I think 6 months is that if you don't have a clean spittoon. So how do you do spittoon management? He told me he spoke to the inspectors and told them that this is our business. So the spittoon clause was overlooked or ignored or something, he said. But the other inspectors then began to harass them. So I think it is a network of corruption where one inspector supports and feeds the other at a human level. Not right now. Right now, electricity is better, but earlier, the electricity, when it was under the public sector, the electricity guy would harass one. You fix that, the water person will come and harass. The third, but the MCD guy will come and harass an average citizen. Now multiply this by 100-fold, 1,000-fold to see the impact on companies. Our research talks about ending these compliances. So
I think
we believe Prime Minister Prime Minister Narendra Modi can begin the end of Inspector Raj. Free the enterprises, let them breathe freely, let them not be harassed, bring digitization, bring formalization, increase formalization. And that is what the report argues. It does not matter if FDI comes or goes. That is a separate thing. We are saying, in case you remove these compliances or reduce these compliances, the entrepreneurial energies of India will increase multifold. India will grow faster.
Okay, I need to digress a little bit, but this question I'm throwing at Mr. Rishi Agarwal. Now, we spoke about the fact that you have to, look at debottlenecking, removing these hurdles to doing business, etc. Now, we are talking at this point of time of an alternate to a very large influencer as far as global trade is concerned. I'm not going to name that particular nation, but you would understand which country I'm referring to. And time is running out. I mean, everyone is talking about the fact that India is the best alternate for this particular nation. So how fast should you work, literally round against the clock in terms of reforming so that you're going to get in that billions of dollars? Let's say over the next, would it be over the next 36 to 48 months? Or would you say that over the next 5 years, at least a majority of the plethora of rules and regulations which are in existence should be done away with? Because time seems to be critical at this point of time.
So Arun, it's a great question. What I do is take a step back for a moment and make sure that we are not misinterpreting our report. Nowhere in the report are we talking about doing away with compliances. Nowhere criminality and rationalizing compliances. Do we need an MSME to go through a few hundred compliances a year is a question that both of us are putting on the table. We are also saying, do 37% of these few hundred compliances need to send entrepreneur to jail in order to keep them disciplined is another question we are throwing. So I don't want us to be misinterpreted by stating that we want government to do away with all these compliances. Absolutely no.
No, I understand the fact. I understand that particular point.
Just for your audience, I want to make sure we're very clear. Nobody should misinterpret us as people lobbying for diluting control or diluting accountability.
Okay.
Over the last many years, running a company focused on compliance management simplification, I've been talking about increasing transparency and accountability in the system. Is required from the law perspective, not creating mechanisms to keep our labor and workers safe, they need to be sent to jail. If somebody is stealing, defrauding, killing, not taking care of equipment which results in death, they need to be sent to jail. But can we send someone to jail for not cleaning a spittoon or not put 2 years? Now tell me one thing, you have a great factory and your current canteen committee is doing an absolutely fantastic job. People love the food that they have and so on and so forth. The law requires a reconstitution of canteen committee every 2 years. Now the company forgot to reconstitute because everybody should these procedural lapses, should these non-compliances or technical lapses, are they grave enough for somebody to land in jail? Is there a question that Gautam and I are asking in the report? Now let me come to your specific question. What is the window of opportunity, right? Now window of opportunity is today. I don't think we can wait till the next 5 years, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
You do the math in terms of what does it take for an entrepreneur from creating an intent to set up a plant to actually going live. That process, Arun, ranges between 18 months to 36 months.
Okay.
So technically, if Gautam thinks of becoming an entrepreneur, leaves his current technical and academic job and starts thinking about creating a factory, and he has lined up all the funds that are required, it will take him between 18 and 36 months to go live and produce the first article or item from his factory. So the gestation period for a well-intentioned, well-funded entrepreneur from start to finish is about 3 years. Now, in order need to make sure that they feel that we have a transparent, accountable, institutional structure which has a good judicial system in case of any contractual obligatory issues. We have a stable tax regime. We have a well-defined, rationalized, digitized, simplified compliance environment. And only then this intention gets reinforcement and support to come and set up a plant in India. Now, the country that you are talking about and the window of opportunity is not going to last forever. We have to open our arms and attract this investment because they are looking for an alternative haven right now. And if we don't take actions between now and the next 12 to 18 months, I think it would be too late. Somebody else will open up the arms. Michael Porter had once said in his book, if you don't kill your own core competencies, somebody else will come and kill them for you. So I think that's where I will rest my case, that the window of opportunity is now. Let's strike when the iron is hot, convert this into an excellent opportunity for putting India's GDP into the next orbit.
Okay, fine. Now, Mr. Gautam, the question that hit my head at this point of time was, what is happening in a place like Haryana? Now, they've come up with one legislation where they mandate that jobs, particularly at the lower level, the blue collar jobs, a large portion of them should be given to the locals. Now, there have been media reports indicating, that there's been some kind of resentment, and there could be possibly a flight of capital out of that particular state. Now, on the one hand, you're trying to do something to create jobs. On the other hand, you are, seen as stifling business. There's talk of flight of capital, etc. Now, juxtapose these two developments to the kind of study that you have done, and could you throw some light as to what exactly needs to be done? How do we do the walking the talk as far as state governments are concerned?
So this is the political policy rather than an economic policy. We don't like it, but then that's the nature of union-state relations. If the state government has the authority to do such stuff, howsoever silly it be, howsoever harmful it may be for its own people, as you mentioned in terms of the flight of capital, so be it. You suffer it, you deal with it, you make your, if virtue signaling rather than actual economic growth is your objective, go have fun. At some point, your state will vote you out of there. Having said that, today, we are not in 1990s, 1970s, 80s. Today, we are in 2021. You will be surprised to know that the fastest growing robotics consumers in the world is India. You want people to be hired. I think there is a wage limit, 25,000 or some wage limit is there. So you're not talking about technical people. You're talking about very unskilled or low-skilled people. Those unskilled and low-skilled people are very easily replaceable by robotics. Not only it's not going to be, this is a future that has already happened. If you look at the plants, some of the plants in Manesar, some of the plants in Gurgaon, robots are already and have already entered there, and they will increase. You harass the business person by putting talent constraints, not only these 69,233 compliance universe on them, but you I'm afraid, I'm very sorry to say this. The changing nature of technology seems as though the governments are not aware of it. They are not taking cognizance of it, and they're just playing to the gallery. I don't think this will end well, but you mentioned flight of capital. That too may not happen because they are high-tech industries or high talent industries, and the salary benchmark would be higher, so they can get from anywhere across the world. At a lower level, there is robotics. I think companies will, flight of talent will not happen, but jobs will definitely go.
Okay, fine. The other question I had in my mind was, the billions of dollars that we're getting at this point of time, much of that happens to go to the startup ecosystem, where, you have a much more flexible approach. You find, youngsters crowding in, you find a lot of vigor, energy, etc. Now, the learnings from the startup ecosystem, where you have, as you pointed out, stress happens to be on the compliance part and less on this Inspector Raj, etc. Can't the lessons of the startup ecosystem be mapped onto other industries, to the MSME sector, to the hardcore manufacturing sector, where, or other sectors where doing business becomes or is becoming extremely cumbersome?
So Arun, it's an unfair comparison. It's apples and oranges, right? And I'll tell you why. Startups typically start really micro. There are a bunch of very young, talented, passionate entrepreneurs who want to set up, who want to solve a problem worth solving. Most of these startups start with under 10 people. And in the early days, at least for the first year or two or three, they do not ramp up beyond 10, 15, 20 people, which means that the number of compliances applicable to them are few and far between. The compliance load increases only when you grow above a threshold number.
Okay.
And then it grows even further when you get into manufacturing. Ask ourselves a question, how many of these startups are into manufacturing? And you will find only a handful of them, a very small percentage of them actually doing manufacturing. Second, most of them are in high-tech jobs, right? Where you're not dealing with, labor class, worker class, unskilled, semi-skilled workers, and so on and so forth. The ones that you are talking about, some of them may have gotten listed recently, and you will see that the number of people on their own roles are very few. Most of them are embracing the gig economy, right? Now, the challenges of gig economy, the regulatory structure there, the compliance requirements there, the labor constraints there are very different. And I think hopefully the codification of labor laws is going to address some of those. But at this point, I don't think it's a fair comparison, or there are really no learnings from less number of compliances in startups which can be put or adopted in a large factory setup, because these are two different businesses, two different sectors, two different kinds of applicable acts and compliances, and there is hardly any commonality from a manufacturing-based compliance in startup.
Okay, fine. Now, the other question I had in mind was, what was happening with regard to, industrial unrest? By and large, unlike the 1970s and perhaps the early 80s, when you had a lot of those strikes in Mumbai, the textile strikes and all that, that's now virtually history. You come across very few of them, few and far between, as far as the industrial unrest is concerned, but some of them do happen. We had one unsavory incident in this particular state of Karnataka, and you also had a bit of unrest as far as, the auto manufacturing zone in Haryana is concerned. So the question is, how do you address that? In the case of the Karnataka incident, for instance, they said that the person, the intermediary who was responsible for compliance, was actually found to be a little bit tardy in terms of compliance, and he was neglecting what was critical. So the question is, how do you look at, enforcing compliance? Because when you talk of enforcement, immediately the phrase that comes to your mind is Inspector Raj. So the question is, how do you address that particular point? Gautam, I would toss this question across to you.
Yeah, no, so we'll have to write another paper in order to explore this. This paper doesn't get into such very specific, these are stray incidents, anecdotes, which we haven't seen. We are talking about a very general nature of the manner in which compliances are drafted, thought, the ideological baggage that they continue to carry, the socialist, the anti-capitalist, the anti-entrepreneur baggage that these laws have, need to end. However, you cannot end ideology, you can only end compliances, or you can only reform laws, you can only reform compliances. To that extent, our report talks about how to make doing business easier. Perhaps in a future, your question is very pertinent. Perhaps in a future research, we may examine these specific instances that you're talking about, and I think there is literature to be created there. However, at this moment, our focus is on this entire universe of macro compliances and that hurt entrepreneurs at a very micro level. Corruption, the root cause of corruption today is these laws. I think once they go, you will see corruption and you will see entrepreneurs freed. Does that mean that we want the end of all these compliances? No, Rishi just told you. We are neither saying that all compliances have to go, nor we are saying that all compliances have to stay. We have put this research in for people, intellectuals like you, to engage with it. This is not a one-time engagement. This engagement will happen over a period of months, even years. So, like Rishi said, in case there is an environmental issue, a degradation or hurting of the environment, of course, criminality stays. In case some workers are being harassed or there is a danger to their life or limb, of course, those need to have. We don't have to put blindly. What I am seeing, what we saw is, which we have reported in the report, is there is a blind, unthinking copy pasting of penalties. Every act of parliament, if you have read, comes in several chapters. Towards the end, you have something called penalties. There's a full chapter on penalties. We find that the nature of penalties is a copy paste rather than looking at it afresh, examining the law afresh, looking at it, thinking about it clearly, examining it compared to various other provisions. Let me give you an example. So I think that would illustrate it for you. I'm going to give you 3 examples.
Okay.
Not whitewashing latrines and urinals once in 4 months under the Factories Act 1948 and related rules carries a jail term. Okay. You know what is the equivalent in IPC? Sedition. The punishment for not whitewashing latrines once in 4 months is that of sedition. Now, this small example that I've given you, we need to rethink. Instead of copy pasting, we need to rethink. What are we doing? What are we drafting? And this drafting happens at the bureaucratic level. The political class gives you a vision, a direction. Very few politicians sit down and read those laws. Once they are given to the bureaucrats, my sense is they want to continue in the copy paste, and let's not waste our time. Let me give you another example. Not furnishing monthly details of inward supplies in form GSTR2 under the Goods and Services Act 2017 carries the same imprisonment as for assault or the use of criminal force on women with the intent to disrobe under IPC. Now you tell me, you haven't filled this form. The punishment, the criminality, the jail term is the same as attempting to disrobe a woman under IPC. Think about it. Is this our lawmaking process? Is this the manner that we want to treat our entrepreneurs? A form. Third, displaying the stock and price of liquefied petroleum gas. Not having, not misplacing, not displaying, okay? Not displaying this stock of price and of liquefied petroleum gas at a conspicuous place of business under the Essential Commodities Act 1955 and related rules carries the same jail term as collecting arms with the intention of waging a war against the Indian government under IPC. These are the excesses that we are looking at. So industrial unrest is an important issue, but I think there is more than adequate literature on this. This report, this paper, this study takes on a new field. I would call it a new field, not field, let's say. I think it's a more interdisciplinary engagement between the legal, economic, policy making, and businesses, putting it all together into a single. So this field of study, because it is disparate, it's union states, it is Factories Act, it is financial laws, it is environmental laws. Putting them all together is our contribution and offering to the scholarship or to the policymakers or to people like you who can engage with it and continue to do so. There is lots of data here, lots of stories to be told. After speaking to entrepreneurs, I think there is tons of things to be done. But this particular thing that you mentioned, industrial unrest, these are anecdotal things, and they may be political, they could be ideological, etc. We don't know, and we are not qualified, and certainly we haven't talked about it in this paper.
Okay, fine. Before I wrap up, I just have one question to Mr. Rishi. The question is the severity of compliance, the burden of proof, etc. Where is it being acutely felt? Is it being felt more by the larger corporates and industrial units, or is it the MSME? Because MSME today happens to be in a very sticky spot. 2 years of the pandemic, and prior to that itself, you saw a slight contraction in the economic activity, and they haven't been doing so well. So in your interaction with people, with entrepreneurs and businessmen, when you drafted this report, where did you find this pain point in terms of compliance and in terms of, the plethora of rules and regulations? Was it affecting or impacting the larger corporates more, or was it very, very injurious as far as the MSME sector was concerned, Mr. Rishi?
So Arun, I would not want to bifurcate data on large and small. Okay. I would want to draw the line between formal and informal. An informal enterprise, which is micro enterprises for most part, does not deal with any compliance burden. There is no need for them to have a PAN number also in majority of the cases. Forget the ESI, the PF, the professional tax, the labor welfare fund, or the Factories Act. None of those, including the GST, are not applicable to an informal enterprise. That should tell you why 63 million enterprises have converted only into 1 million formal enterprises. 98% of our enterprises continue to stay informal by choice. Some by choice, and a large number because of lack of access to capital, talent, and many other things. But I would want to draw that line there. The moment you become formal, and especially if you are in manufacturing, the number of compliances start from 400-500, depending on the sector you are in, and go up to 1,000. Now, let me differentiate this company from a large company. So a formal enterprise, a formal small enterprise, and a formal large enterprise. The difference is a formal large enterprise as well as they can lean on external consultants who are glorified liaisoning agents on their behalf. A small formal enterprise, in majority of the cases, has only one person who does most of this, who's also the promoter, the entrepreneur, the CEO, and the janitor. There's enough money in the bank to pay the salaries, but he's also spending 40 to 50% of his time ensuring that the company is on the right side of the ball. To further complicate scenario, Indian law is not static. We make about 3,500 changes a year. A company of the size that I spoke to you, there's a lot of fluidity in Indian law. Last year, there were close to 3,600 changes, which are in the 5 categories out of the 6 will be applicable to you. And we did a math for one pharma company of very small manufacturer. We found that close to 600 changes that happened out of 3,500 changes in a year were applicable to this business. Now, assuming 250 business days, Arun, you're talking about 2+ changes affecting this enterprise every day. Now, go back to the entrepreneur that we were painting. There's no mechanism today. There's no website of the government today which gives you all the updates in one place. There are 2,233 websites that you expect an entrepreneur to go and figure out if there is a new notification that is there. Now, the notification is written in legalese, so they have to lean on consultants who can, decrypt the notification and understand the implication of that notification. Now, should this entrepreneur focus on growing the business or deal with all this ambiguity and complexity of compliance? So where we are coming from is, in our experience, 30 to 40% of these compliances technically can go away because they have duplication, they have overlaps, they have lost their relevance. Gautam gave you an example of whitewashing latrines once every so often. Some companies have done away with whitewashing requirement because they have put ceramic tiles all the way to the ceiling. The law does not say that if you have ceramic tiles, there is a different requirement. Do we need such microscopic prescriptions in this day and age? Factories Act, unfortunately, was written in 1948 when the world was a different place. India had primarily public sector enterprises. The private participation was next to nothing. Private companies didn't have the capital or sophistication to deal with some of this. Today, public sector's contribution is next to nothing as compared to private sector contribution. The sophistication, the talent, the robotics, the IoT, the industry 4.0 is a lot more evolved in private sector as compared to public sector. Is there a need to revisit some of this and rationalize what we had written back in 1948 when India had just gotten independent? Or should we continue to bear the unfortunate burden of what was written in 1948 till date? Is really the question that we are asking in our report.
Okay, fine. Nice point. Need to rewrite and keep up with time, ensure that you are relevant to the present day or the modern world. That seems to be the message that's coming out clearly. Thank you, Mr. Gautam Chikarmane and Mr. Rishi Agarwal. It was a wonderful interaction. We hope that the governments in various states pay heed to what your work has to talk about. They're able to appreciate the need to reform, to be, out there, in getting the people in, getting the billions of dollars so that millions of jobs could be created, not forgetting the fact that compliance is important. You get punished for non-compliance, but when it comes to frivolous compliance issues, that seems to be the crux of your report, if I can put it across. Frivolous compliance issues, issues which bog down business, should be done away with. I hope I have been able to convey in a few words what your seminal work has been able to convey. And I do believe that the ball is now in the court of various state governments, who should take it up as a challenge and ensure that they are able to reform and make themselves much more industry friendly, investment friendly, and at the same time ensure that millions of people are able to get jobs and we are firmly on the path of economic growth and development. Thank you both for sharing your
Thank you.
precious time with us.
Thank you.